The deaths of Nadav and Avihu have got to seem like one of the weirdest things in the Torah. Nadav and Avihu are dedicated Kohanim. In order to show their dedication and love of God, they even brought their own special offering. But, shazam, next thing you know, they're toast. And then God says that they sanctified him. He killed them, and somehow that extends his holiness. You'd be among some pretty esteemed company if you thought the big guy was being a bit sensitive. And you'd be among even more august folk if you wondered how any of this would make God holy. Well, I think we're about to clear it all up, so why not have a watch and see if you agree. As we've discussed before, holiness is investment in the timeless. We create like God for 6 days, and then we use what we create to invest in the timeless. We can invest with offerings, we can invest by resting with God on the Shabbat and the sabbatical, or we can invest by fighting against the real-world risk and loss that threaten those on the margins of society. It's a yin-yang thing. We change the physical world in order to invest in the unchanging spiritual one. But the whole unchanging spiritual thing is not easy to grasp. So it'd be really helpful to have some general principles to help us engage with the timeless, right? Well, lucky for us, the dietary laws, the laws of Kashrut, come right after the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, and they are an excellent guide to approaching the holy. So, all puns aside, let's dig in. Ignoring dumb blonde jokes, the sky is a place without death. In a way, it has the purity of the heavens. So birds are symbolically close to the heavens. What birds are kosher? Well, the Torah has no general principles defining them. Instead, they are forbidden by name. When we're close to God, He defines the rules. Our own thought is minimized. What about fish? Well, fish live in the waters, which represent the transmission of spirituality. As pointed out by Shia Cohen, scales separate the fish from their waters. They separate these fish from the mass of spirituality. Fins give these fish direction through those waters. The lesson? There are many forms of spirituality. When we immerse in spirituality, our path must be both distinct and directed. We can't just float around. When we come to flying insects, we see the phrase go on four, describing those which are unkosher. The word arba can mean four, but it can also mean multiply. Insects lack individual purpose and will. They just team. They progress not as individuals, but through the process of multiplication and reproduction. They change through genetics. The phrase go on four could be describing this process. Perhaps this is why some of those bugs with thighs that enable them to rise above the earth can be consumed. Thighs and legs are a sign of will in the Torah. Only those bugs with symbolic will are consumable. And as they leap into the air, they must be designated by God, just like the birds themselves. Finally, animals on our own plane must represent the cycle of holiness. By chewing cud, essentially getting the most out of food, an animal shows a symbolic resistance to waste and to loss. They demonstrate purity and a connection to timelessness. Split hooves are a bit more complex. In the Torah, hands represent execution. An animal with no hands at all would have no power of execution or creation, at least in the symbolic plane. But one with palms or hands would be so connected to productive activity that eating them would itself be an act of fundamental destruction. So we pick those in the middle, those with split hooves, like those weird cold weather bicycle gloves. The split hooves represent creation, but do not enable it. The sign of the priestly blessing looks like the sign of the split hooves, perhaps for this very reason. The Kohanim represent the creative, but are not supposed to be creative themselves. So what did Nadav and Avihu do? The mincha offering of ordinary men has 3 elements: oil, representing purification; flour, representing creative effort; and incense, representing emotion. The mincha offering of the Kohanim is similar, but not quite the same. Kohanim are to be an interface with God, not actors in their own right. They are to represent the emotions of the people, not their own emotions. And so there is no incense in their mincha offering. But Nadav and Avihu bring incense, and incense alone, and there is a suggestion that they did so while drunk. Kohanim are awash in spirituality, like fish. Their actions must be distinct and directed. But Nadav and Avihu embrace the incense offering of ordinary men, losing the distinction represented by scales. In addition, they were driven by raw emotion. They didn't have the direction represented by fins. They floated in spirituality. Next, Nadav and Avihu were intoxicated. They lost the power of the will, represented by the jumping bugs. While Nadav and Avihu were close to God, like birds, they defined their own offerings. In this way, they tried to define holiness. But God defines holiness, and the closer to the heavens we draw, the more this is reinforced. Finally, Nadav and Avihu brought only incense. There was no purity as represented by oil, or creativity is represented by flour. The cycle of holiness was replaced by a simple emotional desire to be close to God, and that simple desire isn't enough. We must embrace the cycle of holiness as represented by the split hoof and the chewing of cud. The laws of Kashrut end with the statement, "You shall be holy because I am holy." The laws of Kashrut show us the principles of drawing close to holiness. We are close to the heavens. The kosher birds teach us that our holiness is defined by God. We are awash in spirituality. The kosher fish teach us that our actions must be distinct and directed. We are at risk of simply living our genetic lives. The kosher bugs teach us we must embrace our conscious will. And we are land animals. The kosher animals teach us we must always engage with the cycle of holiness, of creation and investment in the timeless. Nadav and Avihu violated all of these principles, but their deaths reinforced them. This is both why they died and how their deaths sanctified God. Shabbat Shalom.